All right, now let's talk a little bit about your final lab exam. It's going to be 50 questions. It's going to be timed at 150 minutes, so you get about 3 minutes per question. And the questions are primarily going to be fill in the blank. There's a couple of multiple choice, and I think one check all that apply, but by and large, it's going to be fill in the blank. So you're going to need to know the names of all of these structures that you'll be identifying, and you need to spell them correctly. Spelling counts. The only way you're going to get full credit for any question is if it's spelled correctly and it's the correct structure. However, having said that, don't leave any questions blank. There's a strong possibility that I might give partial credit for good guesses. So if you give me a reasonably, anatomically appropriate guess and it's wrong, I might still give partial credit. So don't leave any of the questions blank. Just give me your best guess, okay? As far as what the questions are going to be over, you're going to have 20 questions over the brain and its structures. You're going to have 20 questions identifying muscles. You're going to have 5 questions over the special senses and 5 questions over the spinal cord. Okay, everything you need to know about the brain for the exam is on this page. So I've put the structures that you need to know over here in bold. There is a chance that you might see 1 or 2 of these structures twice on the exam. Once to identify it, and then again to tell me its function. So for several of the structures, I've put the function out here, and I want you to be familiar with these, okay? So go through, make sure you can identify each one of these regions or structures, and be familiar with what the function is. For example, the frontal lobe, you'll want to know, is in charge of planning, execution, and behavior. The olfactory nerve, you'll want to know, relays information about smells. The pineal gland, you'll want to know, secretes melatonin and is in charge of circadian rhythm. Okay, what do you need to know about muscles? All I'm asking you about muscles is to identify them. And these are all the muscles that will be on the exam, all 20 of them. So go through, make sure you can identify all 20 of these muscles. Okay, what do you need to know about special senses and the spinal cord? Well, not much. Okay, there's only going to be 10 questions over both of these topics. And really, for special senses, you're going to be dealing with the eye and the ear. Okay, so the eye, I want you to know the anterior cavity, the anterior chamber. I want you to know the pupil. For the ear, I want you to know the eustachian tube, and I want you to know the semicircular canal. Now for the spinal cord, you need to know the anterior horn and the lateral horn, and you need to know which neurons reside there. And you need to know the dorsal root and which neurons reside there. You need to know the dorsal root ganglia and be able to identify them. You need to be able to identify the cauda equina. And that's really all you need to know as far as special senses and spinal cord go. And we will go over several of these questions together. All right, so let's go over some questions together. First question here is, what is the function of the highlighted structures? You can see here the highlighting. So this is a cranial nerve. And in fact, this is the olfactory nerve. And I want you to know that the olfactory nerve is involved in the sense of smell. Okay, name the highlighted structure here. This is going to be the medulla oblongata. And remember, this is in charge of autonomic functions, so such as the heart rate, respirations, and blood pressure. All right, what is the function of the highlighted structure? So first you need to know that this is the cerebellum. And I want you to know that the cerebellum is responsible for smooth, coordinated movements. Name the outline structures here. So this is going to be the thalamus. And remember, the thalamus is a relay station. So it filters and directs sensory information coming in from the rest of the body, and it redirects it to the proper locations in the brain. What is the function of the highlighted structure? So this structure here, you need to know, is the pineal gland. And its function is it secretes melatonin. And it helps control the circadian rhythm. Okay, name the highlighted structure. This is the pituitary gland. And remember, the pituitary gland has an anterior portion and a posterior portion. And remember that the anterior pituitary gland produces hormones like FSH and TSH. The posterior pituitary, on the other hand, stores hormones that have been made by the hypothalamus, oxytocin, an antidiuretic hormone, and it releases those hormones. Okay, name the highlighted structure. This is cranial nerve 2, or the optic nerve. This guy relays visual information from the eyes to the brain. Okay, is the highlighted structure gray matter or white matter? Well, this is gray matter. So remember, in the brain, the gray matter is going to be kind of on the outside, okay, and the white matter is on the interior of the brain. And that reverses in the spinal cord. So the gray matter in the spinal cord is going to be the interior of the spinal cord, and the white matter is going to be on the outside of that in the spinal cord. Okay, name the highlighted structure here. This is the fourth ventricle, all right, and it circulates cerebrospinal fluid. All right, this is identify the highlighted structures. And the structures highlighted here are the lateral ventricles. And again, these guys circulate CSF. Okay, so this says name the cavity or chamber highlighted in green. So I want you to see this question and I want you to compare it to this question. So you're going to have both of these on the test. And the task here is to tell me basically which one is the anterior chamber and which one is the anterior cavity. Okay, so the anterior chamber only is going to have this anterior-most portion highlighted green, whereas the anterior cavity is going to have the anterior chamber highlighted green and the posterior chamber highlighted green. And together, these make up the anterior cavity. Okay, so don't get these confused. This is the anterior chamber. Remember, only the anterior-most portion is highlighted green. This is the anterior cavity. And you've got the anterior chamber highlighted green and the posterior chamber highlighted green. And together, these make up the anterior cavity. Name the highlighted structure here. This, highlighted in green, is the eustachian tube. All right, let's move on to some muscles. So the highlighted muscle here is highlighted in teal or cyan. And this is the masseter muscle. This muscle is the platysma muscle, very superficial muscle. This is going to be your deltoid muscle, okay? So this is the anterior aspect of the arm, and you know that because you can see the clavicle here, right? And so this muscle up here around the shoulder is your deltoid. Okay, again, you can see we're looking at the anterior aspect of the arm. You know that because here's the clavicle, and here are the abdominal muscles. So we know we're looking at the anterior aspect. This muscle highlighted in purple is the biceps brachii muscle. Again, on the anterior aspect of the arm, and this time we are looking at the brachialis muscle. Okay, now we're looking at the forearm, and the muscle here that we're looking at that's highlighted Okay, this is the posterior view of the arm, and again, you can tell because you can't see the clavicle and you see back muscles here. So this highlighted muscle is going to be the triceps muscle. The highlighted structure here is the rectus abdominis muscle. Okay, and the highlighted structure here is going to be the external abdominal oblique muscle. This is the posterior aspect of the leg. You can see the heel here and the bottom of the foot. And this muscle is the gastrocnemius muscle. This is the posterior aspect of the thigh. And the highlighted muscle is the gluteus maximus muscle. Continuing down the posterior aspect of the thigh, this highlighted structure here is the semitendinosus muscle. Now we're looking at the anterior aspect of the thigh. Here's the knee. And the highlighted muscle here is the rectus femoris muscle. Again, we're looking at the anterior aspect of the thigh. And the highlighted structure here is the sartorius muscle, the longest muscle in the body. The highlighted muscle here is the iliopsoas muscle. Name the highlighted structures. The highlighted structures here are these swellings coming off of the dorsal root. So these are dorsal root ganglia. Remember, this is where those sensory neurons, where their cell bodies are located. I would also accept posterior root ganglia, okay, because the dorsal root and the posterior root are the same thing. The highlighted structure here is the cauda equina. Name the structure here. This is the anterior horn. Okay, so this is the anterior portion, or the anterior aspect. This is the posterior aspect, okay? So, and then here are the horns of the spinal cord. This is going to be the anterior horn. This is going to be the lateral horn. And this is going to be the dorsal, or the posterior horn. The anterior horn is where cell bodies of motor neurons are. The lateral horn is where the autonomic neuron cell bodies are. Okay, and then finally, what kind of neurons reside here? Well, remember, this is the lateral horn. This is going to be where we find autonomic neurons. Okay, so this is pretty much what your test is going to look like. I've given you several examples here of questions that might show up on your exam, so I would go through and study these. I would make sure that you're able to identify every single one of these muscles. I would make sure that you're able to identify these regions of the brain and know their functions as well. And like the midterm lab exam, I'm going to have to go through and manually grade every one of your exams. So when it gives you your raw score, don't freak out. That raw score is probably very low compared to what your actual score is. I have to go in and make some adjustments. So give me time to do that. And then when I have adjusted everyone's lab exam, I will make an announcement letting you know that the final lab exam grades have been posted. So go through this packet, study all the structures, make sure you know where they are. I highly recommend that you watch this lab review a few times and be very familiar with all of the answers that I've given you for these different questions that might be on the test, so make sure that you're very familiar with those. Shoot me a message if you have any questions over the material that you'll be studying. And remember to give me some time to adjust those final grades, and I'll let you know when I've made all of the adjustments, okay? Good luck.